I'm here to talk about something that's come to mean a great deal for me personally in the last 10 years. And it's how the season of Advent, which isn't it just a great season for choral music, exhausting but wonderful, but has become for me something much more than that. And it's become the spiritual reset because of the honest way that it creates space for lament and for hope. I realize that in the room that we have very different practices of handling the church calendar. Some of us are very lectionary based and will have those assigned readings that give us 4 Sundays before Christmas. Others of us never use the lectionary, but we have a lectionary in Advent known as the wreath. And so even if we don't use a lectionary all year, we have love, joy, peace, etc. Or we have shepherds, wise men, Mary. The candles mean different things in different traditions. But there is this season of expectation and hope that for me is such a reset. And what I'd like to reflect on today is the way that that season could be for us the anchor for thinking about the entire calendar. And it was about 10 years ago that in my own work I began to think, what if in the summer we picked the music that was going to be sung in Advent first? And we did our very best to make sure it was the highest protein Advent we could offer to our young singers and our veteran singers and our congregations, and then how we could build the year around that. And I think it's something about the cultural travail that was named in worship this morning that has made it feel even more urgent for me. And this was the text that for me anchored it. Some of you know Thomas Truger's text, "View the present through the promise." What a text. Oh my word, what a text. View the present through the promise, Christ will come again. Trust despite the deepening darkness, Christ will come again. And then this just breathless, lift the world above its grieving through your watching and believing in the hope past, hope's conceiving, Christ will come again. And there are a lot of good tunes for it. I do like Roy Hopp's tune because he doesn't let you breathe the whole way. It's just one big. And then when you get to that third stanza, match the present to the promise. Christ will come again. Make this hope your guiding premise. Christ will come again. And then for anybody near a university, this line, actually anybody near any group of people that wants to be engaged in the world. Pattern all your calculating and the world you are creating to the Advent you are waiting. Christ will come again. That is some gutsy poetry. So in the past year, my wife and I have been on quite an adventure, moving from Grand Rapids, Michigan after 28 years to Nashville. Moving from a denominationally affiliated school, in my case, to a robustly ecumenical school. And I entered Belmont this year knowing that the theme that we are exploring together is really the theological virtue of hope. So it's sort of been Advent all year for me, literally, in work with students. And one of the joys of that has been the opportunity to learn from writers in many Christian traditions. Belmont has many Baptist students. It has many non-denominational students. It has many Methodist students and Presbyterian students, and about 20% of the student body would be Catholic. And one of the happy surprises here in Nashville is that there is a large Coptic community. There are 20 Coptic churches in Nashville, 20,000 Coptic Christians, and many of whom immigrated here after the Arab Spring. And those churches are packed. A colleague of mine went to the Feast of the Nativity at St. Mina's, not far from here, and we got there about 2.5 hours into the service, which meant that there were about 5 more hours to go. And the place was packed, and it was like experiencing Coptic chant right out of the year 400. I mean, most of the people who were in that space had chanted those chants for years in Cairo, and now we're chanting them here in Nashville. And so what that's meant for me is that the Coptic Pope's book, Life of Hope, sits alongside right now on my reading list with students. Writings from Presbyterian and Anglican and more progressive, Martin Luther King, Pope Francis, a wonderful new book by Steve Garber called Hints of Hope. And in many ways, every one of these books takes that Thomas Truger text and tries to live deeply into it. And what I'm finding, not surprisingly, is students are hungry for realistic hope. I think our congregations are hungry for realistic hope. Not the pie in the sky, bright siding, echoes of what my wife shared yesterday, but nevertheless, echoes of a gospel we believe in, which is that God ultimately is making all things new and is calling us to pattern the world we're creating to the advent we are waiting. And it's a beautiful thing to be with a group of students engaged in one of these texts and sort of feel that like hope gear kick in. It is such a joy. So for all of us, how can Advent be all year long? First, just a little echo of yesterday. As Charlotte was talking yesterday about benefit finding, she was very careful, especially at the end, to say it goes right alongside with the just acknowledgement. It's both the truth-telling about what's wrong in the world and then the active looking for how God may be at work. Both pieces of that go together. It kind of fits the description I had written for this session a couple months back. And the more I've been thinking about that lately, I keep coming back to the historic structure of worship in the early church. It turns out, I think, that it's probably more variable than most of us realize how orders of worship began to crop up in Palestine and Egypt and Syria and Asia Minor. But over time, how there was a settling in. And one of the things that settled most permanently is this idea that healthy Christian worship always begins with both the Kyrie and the Gloria, both the Lord have mercy and the glory to God on high. And of course, every setting of the Mass would have those two anchor texts to start. And I think that, again, is the opportunity for us. Now, view the present through the promise. I always have thought of that as a first Sunday of Advent piece. But I'd encourage you to think about a piece like that as being a year-round kind of piece. And to think about every possible way that a text like View the Present Through the Promise could land in different ways through the year. I'll just mention one example right now, and it's for any Lord's Supper service where there is any faint echo of the memorial acclamation that what we do at the table is to celebrate that Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. Personally, I think that Eucharistic celebrations, Lord's Supper celebrations, regardless of what tradition we're talking about, would be immeasurably enriched. If we're picking music for Lord's Supper celebration, to pick one Good Friday song and one Easter song and one Christ will come again song. Those three dimensions actually get at the power and meaning of the Eucharist so powerfully. They almost capture a whole seminar on Eucharistic theology in just that choice. I don't know about you, I grew up in a 3 Good Friday songs tradition. The emphasis was on remembering Jesus' death, and that is a very good thing to do. It's just that the Lord's Supper and the Christian faith comes into its fullness when we're not only remembering Jesus' death and celebrating how Jesus rose from the dead, but we're also doing View the Present Through the Promise as a way of life. And that Advent text gives us that guide all year long. I think last night, when we heard Oh So So start that concert last night, I felt Advent all year long. So on the screen is my personal favorite arrangement of that by my former colleague at Calvin, Joel Navarro, who took that Oh So So and that Come now, O Prince of Peace, make us one body, haunting, aching, lament-like, yearning, and turned it into a procession for Advent. Here's the thing about that piece. That piece really, really lands and landed powerfully in ways I'll never forget for my students from Korea. Because the Make Us One Body is not a benign, simple prayer. That piece is about North Korea and South Korea. It is about praying for a mighty work of the Spirit to overcome one of the most pernicious political divides in the last century, certainly. And so there's a way for a prayer in Advent to hook up with acknowledgement of an event like that. And then, of course, the analogies abound. The communities where Ukrainians and Russians in North America live pretty close together and need to pray a prayer like that. So over the last 10 years, I've been looking every time a piece like that lands, and boy, last night again, the slide got added last night as a reminder of yet another way that Advent can spill over into the year. And then a third text, before we'll go in a couple different directions, has to be my all-time favorite anthem, appropriate for, I think I've concluded every single Sunday of the year. And this one is a text that is a special connection for me because of a committee meeting I was once in with Al Fedak. We were working on a little hymnal supplement called Sing a New Creation, and Sylvia Dunstan's text came in front of us. And you have to just think a minute about the refrain line, which adores Christ as, quote, the everlasting instant. It's paradoxical. It's paradoxical because Sylvia Dunstan was reading the works of Søren Kierkegaard, the philosopher, before putting this hymn together, and every single line of the hymn is a paradox. And the construction of it is just breathtaking. You, Lord, are both lamb and shepherd. You are both prince and slave. You, peacemaker and sword bringer of the way you took and gave. You, the everlasting instant, you whom we both scorn and crave. Clothed in light upon the mountain, stripped of might upon the cross, shining in eternal glory, beggared by a soldier's toss. You, the everlasting instant, you who are both gift and cost. You who walk each day beside us, sit in power at God's side. You who preach a way that's narrow, have a love that reaches wide. You, the everlasting instant, you who are our pilgrim guide. Worthy is our earthly Jesus. Worthy is our cosmic Christ. Worthy your defeat and victory. Worthy still your peace and strife. You, the everlasting instant, you who are our death and life. Kyrie and Gloria work in juxtaposition. But what Kierkegaard did, and Sylvia Dunstan picked up on it, is the next level. It is to see just the utter paradoxical compression of those two things in a single text. And in my experience, a text like this is so rich, so dense, so high protein, that singing it just once only begins to scratch the surface. It's a text you need to return to and teach and dwell with over time. It is a great text to put right now in your planner for Christ the King Sunday, if you celebrate it next November, and then repeat it on Christmas, Epiphany, Baptism of our Lord, Palm Sunday, Easter, Pentecost, Transfiguration, the direct reference, you got it all right in there. Just think how easy that year is going to be for you. You just have one piece that just moves right along. You've done it. That's just wonderful. And then I have to just tell you that Al Fedak, what a great composer and arranger he is. So we were sitting around with this text, and I still remember it. What tune do you set it to? And so we landed, the tune we sang this morning, on Picardy, which means that you have this lovely melisma on the everlasting instant. And so you actually have a paradoxical, musical little text painting of the actual words you're singing, which I guarantee you, the first time you explain it to a choir, they have no idea what you're talking about. But it is pretty powerful. You, the everlasting instant. Yeah, the instant that list endures. It's very powerful. It's a text that can be sung all year long. And then I'd like to say a brief word of gratitude to longtime collaborator Carlos Colon down in the Baylor community, who worked on a team and was really one of the leading people behind this comprehensive collection of bilingual hymns. It is 350 songs, originally in Spanish, translated into English. 350 songs, originally in English, translated into Spanish. In other words, every effort to make this a musical meeting place that is not one majority culture sort of looking down toward another culture. It is the rich complexity of Spanish-speaking countries, I think it's 22 different countries with songs represented, interacting with a pretty complex offering denominationally from English-speaking contexts. And if I think of the about 5 years of work that went into editing this, the title is simply Santo, 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 Holy, 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 published by GIA. The pieces that really stick with me still from those long committee meetings were view the present kind of text, Advent kind of text. Because in our world today, Spanish, English together is such a powerful embodiment of patterning the world we're creating after the Advent we are waiting, where people from every nation and tribe will gather. Not one dominant, but all people gathered around that throne, bringing the gifts of their own culture into that kingdom. For me, Carlos's Love Shall Overcome, written to commemorate Archbishop Romero, and another wonderful setting of Psalm 80, Restore Us, O God, are examples that came out of that book that sort of fit this vision that I'm talking about today. But now I'd like to switch gears and think for a minute about the ministry you all have in hospice units, funerals, and times of grief. In reflections that I've had with colleagues in church ministry over the last few years, this has become more and more important to me. And I think it's certainly events in our own family story, but it's thinking that, in some ways, all the music we lead on Sunday, this is a little hyperbole, but all the music we lead in worship could be thought of as planting seeds, rehearsals for the music we need to know in order to sing at a funeral. Or the music that we want people to be able to access when they are gathered in a hospice facility, where that music is so powerful for offering comfort and hope and stability and creating the context for the kind of testimonies that can bless families for generations to come. I never knew why Grandpa loved that song. I had no idea the story behind that carol. It would be interesting to actually, over meals and conversation throughout the day, think together about how we could nurture the ministry of the music of comfort during times of hospice and funeral preparation. I think one thing might just be being intentional about it. Actually, it has occurred to me, having recently worked on a will and a power of attorney and medical directive documents, that actually I think we all need another document to add to the list. It is called the Hospice Spotify Playlist. If I am ever in hospice, there are certain selections I would prefer not to hear. But a Bach cantata every morning, and I tell my kids, look, every night at 7 o'clock you just start Handel's Messiah, the complete version, and I'm good every night with that piece. And I'm serious, it means that much to me. It's a little playful about a serious matter, but I actually think that would be a really interesting exercise for choirs. It would be a gift to families. It could be a little tad morbid to bring it up, though. I understand. So maybe there are other ways to get at it. What about a compilation of the heart songs of everybody in your choir? And then you start with round one. Now, how about we add everybody's second place and third place heart song? And then you actually say, hey, why don't you actually create a Spotify list and send that to your kids and grandkids? And then maybe the grandkids have a Spotify list they'll share with those who are a little older. And the Spotify playlist sharing begins to build up a way of thinking about those songs that mean so much to us. Funeral planning is powerful. That Spotify playlist is powerful. But of course, what we're doing is building the repertoire of ways of thinking about testimony. For me personally, one of the moments that I've been thinking a lot about is an experience I had about 15 months ago in Chicago. Some of you have been on the Tri-State Highway driving around Chicago, and you see in the distance this water tower. It says Alsip on the side. Most of us at one point or another, whether or not we live in Chicago, will be in a traffic jam right next to that water tower. The Tri-State, which is forever under construction, going south of O'Hare Airport. I'm actually taking a picture of that water tower from the cemetery where Thomas Dorsey is buried. Precious Lord, take my hand. We know that he wrote it in a time of profound grief. And my guess is that Precious Lord, take my hand makes it onto a lot of Spotify playlists. I have to just tell you what a profound thing it was, and it took a little work. It's a little easier now with some things that have been added online, but to find where this grave is. So Henry Louis Gates did this amazing, documentary on PBS on Music of the Black Church, and he had footage from the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago. And we know where Thomas Dorsey wrote that song. We know where Thomas Dorsey lived, and you can still find the Morris and Martin Music Publishing building, brick wall, faint Morris and Martin, which would have been the publisher of Dorsey's works. So 15 months ago, and you'll now understand why this means so much to me, I had the opportunity to spend a day tracking down historical sites in Chicago with my dear friend, many of our dear friends and mentors, Jimmy Abington, who passed away in September. And to be in Chicago at the place where a song was written whose story is so frequently told in ways that actually do that work of ministry was so powerful. This is actually the grave that he would have been at. And I should actually just say, it's the grave of his infant who died in childbirth and his wife. He himself is buried back over in near Bronzeville in Chicago. But this is where he would have gone the week he wrote Precious Lord, Take My Hand. And this very unassuming place. We went to the front office at the cemetery. Older African-American woman had worked there 50 years. I said, do you know the hymn, Precious Lord, Take My Hand? It's my favorite hymn. Do you know the connection to the cemetery? She had no idea. And we had the sweetest, most powerful conversation there. Though there are stories and places and connections, not just with that song. Almost every cemetery in the city of Nashville, I'm discovering, has a very famous singer buried in it, including the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And finding those grave sites and thinking about Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to take me home. What a profound thing right in this city. I think there are just all kinds of ways, the narratives, the places, the Spotify lists, that we can live into that side of our calling, not to make our jobs morbid, but to actually make comfort land and take root. And we become true ministers of music, pastoral musicians. What a gift that is. I couldn't help but put a slide up just celebrating some of Jimmy's works. And then one more moment, this past 6 weeks or so, the passing of Richard Smallwood. Now, I happen to be in 3 different worshiping communities in this city that, I will just say it this way, could not be more different demographically, racially. All 3 of these communities had Total Praise on the week following his death, which meant that those musicians had the opportunity to tell the story of Total Praise and get into the meaning of Richard's life and ministry. And I thought, what a gift that was. So ever since I submitted the title for this session, it's been these examples from ministry in times of grief and of mourning that have continued to flow. And then I can't leave this little section without a word about this amazing text about Alzheimer's. Anson Armstrong is touring with the St. Olaf Choir right now. I think it's been on the tour program every single year for the last 10 years. And he programs that, in honor of his mother. And at almost every time I've heard them in concert, he will turn and ask everybody in the audience whose family has experienced Alzheimer's in one way or the other to raise their hand. It's almost always 3/4. And I just think for us to just cherish the texts like this that do that work and to look for ways to make those intentional connections is so powerful. And I just have such a strong sense here, I'm truly preaching to the choir, because I have this strong sense that so many of you, that's who you are. You are pastor musicians, and then what I can just say, like my wife said yesterday, is you matter a lot. Thank you. I'd also like to say a word about children. Advent hope. And I chose here to put a little surprising word up there. Advent hope in ministries of catechesis. So I'll tell you, the Advent Christmas song that in many ways has the most vigorous expression of eschatological hope is none less than Once in Royal David City. Spouse of one of my longtime musical colleagues died tragically about 25 years ago on December 17. So you're planning a funeral for December 23. And I still remember my first conversation with her, lament, grief. And I remember saying, Once in Royal David City, she finished, because she knew she wanted to sing and have sung at the funeral for her husband. This poignant hymn about God's ultimate eschatological future for us. But here's the discovery. I should have known this. The discovery I made about Once in Royal David City last year. I was actually had the privilege for the first time to be in Derry in Northern Ireland. And we were touring, actually working on a peacemaking pilgrimage, meeting with Catholic and Protestant communities that had been plagued by the Troubles, which sets your heart on Advent in a pretty big way. And when we got to Derry, it became clear that I did not really fully understand the story of how Cecil Francis Alexander wrote this text. But this text, when you look at it in its original form, if you get out the original, Google Books can deliver it just like it can Isaac Watts Salter, you realize that she was actually writing a little hymnal for children, which was a catechism book. And when you look at the table of contents, you see that there was a morning hymn for children she wrote, and an evening hymn, and a Trinitarian hymn, and a Baptist hymn. And then the promises and renunciations around baptism, which lead to the section on the creed. And I want to say, I am really glad that she wrote songs based on every single line of the creed, because we still sing some of these texts today. So did you know that All Things Bright and Beautiful was a catechetical hymn for the first line of the creed? And Once in Royal David City is her catechetical explanation text for the second article of the creed about the birth of Jesus. And the third one, anyone know the third famous one that comes from this? It's a little less famous. You got it. There is a green hill far away was Good Friday. Now, Cecil Francis Alexander was doing a Martin Luther. Martin Luther had this cluster of hymns called catechism hymns. They were 6 hymns with the parts of the Lutheran Catechism so that kids could learn the fundamentals of the Christian faith. And it was powerful for me to think again about what it was like for Luther to make those selections, but for her to make that choice. And I thought, now there is a curriculum designer. God be praised that so many wonderful church musicians in the United States are music educators. Because I think there's an opportunity here for us to reclaim this practice. It may be that we can commission text writers to do some new writing. I'm all for that too. But I think it can start with a curated list that we each put together. What are the 6 songs we want every 10-year-old kid in our church to know? And are we giving them protein to sustain a life of faith? Okay. What are the 15 songs we want the 12-year-olds to know? And the 21 songs we want the 15-year-olds to know? And then can we be intentional about the content of those texts and the emotional range of the music? We absolutely want celebratory songs of praise. Absolutely. But you see what I'm doing now is petitioning for at least one achingly honest lament in the direction of hope song that every kid knows is not incidental to their faith, but is at the heart of it. And I'm just telling you, the Belmont kids I'm working with right now will rejoice at having a song like that deep in their souls. I think that young person here who loved Be Still My Soul has some amazing text deep in his soul. My goodness, that was inspiring. Just to even imagine it. But I think there too is the vision. So it's not just thinking of the adults who are depressed by reading newspapers all day long. It's what are we giving our 10-year-olds to prepare them for the day when they will start reading the newspaper all day long. And I think Advent is the place to do it. And there's good inspiration there. Very briefly, I just want to say a word about, now I'm going to just say what a joy it's been for me over the last few years to really work at this Advent theme. About 10 years ago with the choirs at Calvin and wonderful colleagues, Joel Navarro and Pearl Shanquan, we began this little thing with our students. We said, our Advent service, it's our annual assault on sentimentality. Let's go after it together. And because there's just so much amazing high protein music you want to be able to do. And you really do want to still have Silent Night at the end with candles, okay? And at its best, that's not a sentimental thing. It's super high protein to really engage that text. But what we found is the students needed a little bit of coaching about why doing the deeper dive, high protein thing could actually be like one of their favorite things of the year. So we always try to keep a twinkle in our eyes. The annual Advent assault on sentimentality, And it's amazing, you put a little twinkle along with that, you can go a long way. Just saying. My favorite service of all, for a Calvinist, this is going on a limb. But we actually had a Christmas, like university-wide celebration, and we called our service a Pentecostal Christmas. You have to do a little work to make sure that every single text in the lessons and carols makes reference to the Holy Spirit. But when you do, you realize the Gospel of Luke is Pentecostal. The Holy Spirit's all over Luke 1 and 2. And my own formation in the Reformed Presbyterian tradition, I'll just say it this way, did not always prepare me to notice that. What a gift it is. And then to realize it was the Holy Spirit who came upon Mary and Elizabeth and Simeon and Anne. It's just all over. The Gospel of Luke actually all the way through. And so you reach for the Song of Simeon or settings of Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. Of the Father's love begotten in this wonderful Trinitarianism and love divine, all loves excelling. And then we pulled 2 texts right out of Pentecost Sunday and dropped them in the middle of Advent, and it popped right and came to life in beautiful ways. Or the year we did, For God so loved the cosmos, which is the literal word in John 3. John 3:16 does not say, for God so loved our individual souls that he sent his son. It does not say, for God so loved the spiritual world. It says, for God so loved the cosmos. Well, that's some serious theology right there, which meant it was joy to the world Christmas, right? As far as the curse is found. And all of these amazing texts, O Mani Mysterium, animals? Animals. You sing about animals with all that ethereal music? That's doing some theological work there. And then, of course, Mary Louise Bringle's Now the Heavens Start to Whisper and Light Dawns in a Weary World. And so. And then the last one I had a chance to work on was inspired by Fleming Rutledge's amazing book called Advent. And we titled the service An Apocalyptic Advent. This one you have to brace yourself a little bit. This is the My Lord, what a morning the stars are about to fall Advent. But apocalypse ultimately means unveiling. That's what the book of Revelation is, the unveiling. And when you put My Lord, what a morning and Where shall I be when the trumpet sounds and then sing, Lo, he comes with clouds descending, you have just such, again, theological horsepower, high protein. There's so much to go for. I hope a few of these things feel very implementable. It's just about keeping the Kyrie Gloria ratio working well for you. But then a few of these things that point to me, Advent is inexhaustible. Absolutely. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit as we're out of time here to say one of the themes I'm working on with the students right now at Belmont is inspired in part by this gutsy, challenging book, kind of short book by a German writer named, and it's a book called The Uncontrollability of the World. And it kind of gets at how all of us feel completely out of control. It names that experience in a powerful way. And we've been trying to look for music that speaks to that. And I was rather surprised to be in a couple conversations where this old text, if you but trust to God, he guide you, was the text that seemed to speak to the anxiety of the moment in such powerful ways. I was so inspired, Doug, by the work you and your colleagues did on that study. And I did just want to note on page 39, there's some great texts about hope in the profession. And I think when I read those texts and I feel the relational pull, I think it's from people who are thinking about hospice units and funerals and lament and hope and music for kids that's high protein and Spotify. You see there's, to me, this is where the hope is in the profession with such great possibilities. To close, brief word from my sponsors. Belmont University, I'm not directly involved, has this amazing creative arts collaborative that is offering grants related to amazing engagement for people of faith in any art form, primarily outside of public worship. And then my dear colleagues back at Calvin continue to offer the grants program related to sustaining learning over time. So I'm just saying you could send a grant to Calvin and say that the whole point of it is to just extend Advent throughout the entire year. And just send it in and see what they think. The program is meant to sustain learning over time, and I think there's great potential. I look forward to talking with you again in a session 2 from now, but thanks so much for this, and I'm grateful for you.